Okay, I think we're live. Uh, how's everybody doing out there? Let's see here. Yeah, I think we're live. Oh, so welcome to the live stream today. I'm really excited about today. 2 weeks removed here from being in the hospital, and that was quite an ordeal. As I'm waiting for some people to come on, I'll give you a little a little insight into what happened. That so about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I started feeling really bad. I thought it was just a sinus infection that I get a couple times a year when the seasons change. I actually have a major nose problem. I've had surgery on that in the past. I don't have any cartilage in my nose, um, which is interesting. So I always get tension headaches and sinus headaches. So I got these really bad headaches for 3 or 4 days. Feeling very fatigued, a little bit of a cough, and then on the weekend, a couple weekends ago, my heart rate was really bad. I was 150 resting heart rate, and so after about a day of doing that, and even when I just get up to go get a drink of water, I felt like I'd run 2 miles, and so I told my wife, I've got to go to the hospital, or not the hospital, but I've got to go. I don't like to go to the doctor, but we went to an urgent care, and my oxygen was at 58%. So the doctor's like, "We gotta get you in the hospital." Went in the hospital, had X-rays, chest X-ray, apparently damaged lungs. It's a broken glass look at the bottom and an infection on top of that, which was pneumonia. I got COVID back in December. Wasn't so bad. I had 3 kidney stones at the time I got COVID, so the pain of that was, probably took my mind off of COVID. COVID didn't seem that bad for me anyway at that time, but apparently did some damage to my lungs, complications 3 or 4 months later. The pulmonologist that I saw at the hospital said that they've seen that quite a bit. And so they put me on antibiotics and steroids and four almost 5 days in the hospital. I got out feeling a lot better. I've been having to breathe into one of those things to strengthen my lungs. Those little things that they give you where you have to kind of balance the thing out when you're breathing. So I'm feeling a lot better off the oxygen, a little bit of oxygen at night, but I'm feeling about 95, 96%, getting there. So I wanted to tell you as a community, thank you so much for your prayers, your good vibes, your great energy that you sent. Um, that really touched my heart. This is a great community. I love the positivity, the healing power of music, and it just brings this community together. And you guys are amazing. I really appreciate all the well wishes. It really helped me. I felt that strength. So feeling a lot better, and I'm excited because we have so many great things coming up. Got some great interviews planned, and some great content. I was really excited about yesterday's piece with the zombies. Thank you very much, Kelly Christensen. Appreciate that. Um, I just feeling a lot better, feeling the strength of the community, and we're going to get right down to the the greatest songs and the greatest artists of all time, and continue to tell that story. Another thing I wanted to tell you really quick before we get into the underappreciated artists through the decades is that I had this really interesting situation happen where about a month ago I got an email from a gentleman a guy named John Javna, who had written a book back in the 1980s. And it just so happens that when I was about 8 years old, maybe 9 years old, for Christmas, I got this book called Behind the Hits. It's the stories of the songs of the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. One of the first books I got on music, always been interested in the stories of the songs, as I brought up in past videos about growing up in a small town and listening to the American Top 40 every week and just being obsessed with the stories behind the songs and the artists. And I had this book. I read it cover to cover. I loved it so much. And he wrote this book with another guy, Bob Shannon, who was a radio DJ, and it was a bestseller back in the 80s. I think it came out in 85. And it was really interesting because he reached out and said, I have all this research from this book I did and interviews that I've done with a lot of the songwriters, transcribed interviews that I did over the phone, and a lot of research. It's a huge box, and I've went to throw it away 3 or 4 times over the years, but something's always held me back from throwing it away. Would you be interested in having it? You can use it because I guess he's a fan of the channel, and and the content, and said, you can use it. There's some great stories in here that we didn't end up using them for the book. Some we did. I said, of course, I would love to. He sent it to me. I've got it downstairs. And we're talking about stories of the songs from Roy Orbison and some of the great 50s artists, Otis Blackwell, who wrote a lot of Elvis Presley's biggest hits. And some of these people are gone. And we have the stories of the songs in their own words. And so he sent me all this information. So I'm doing a new show, a new program over at Patreon, our Patreon, where I'll do the story behind a couple of songs every week. And I'll basically give you the story from these interviews, and he's even got some audio and stuff like that. And so go over there. We'll do a lot of 50s and 60s and 70s. Some of the stuff that we don't get to on this channel, we'll cover over there. So check that out at Patreon if you want to see it. We just did one on Roy Orbison, Only the Lonely. The story of that, I guess he actually gave the song to Elvis and was going to allow Elvis to record it. And Elvis didn't get to it, so he ended up recording it anyway. Oh my gosh, David Tyler, my heavens, $99. Wow. I want to recognize David Tyler out there. That's amazing. Jeez. Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it. If you have a question, please let us know. Gosh, thank you so much for the support. It just helps us to do more stories, more songs. Thank you, Jonathan Rios. Awesome channel of your videos. Great documentary about the music that we couldn't have the opportunity to live it. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, let's get into it, guys. So I read some of your comments on when I announced it, of some of the underappreciated artists through the decades. There is no right or wrong answer here. We all have our opinions, our feelings. And so I wanted to start by going through some of mine. And just the first thing that came to my mind, it would probably be different artists on a different day. As you know, my wife and my kids always give me a hard time because I say, this is your dad in your dad's top 5 greatest songs of all time. They say, honey, you have 500 songs in your top 5. That's kind of how I am with underappreciated artists. We all love an underdog. And we, as music nerds, we really geek out on our favorite artists that don't get the critical due. And some are the opposite. They get the critical due, but they don't get recognized mass appeal. And so I've got a few of those artists, and then I want you to share some of yours. So I'm going to start in the 50s. Wanda Jackson, who is the queen of rockabilly. She's incredible singer. And she toured with Elvis. In fact, they dated. And she is incredible. You should go look her up if you don't know of her stuff. The queen of rockabilly. And one of my favorite songs, she later did some country stuff when rockabilly started dying out. Tears Will Be the Chaser for Your Wine is a great song if you want to check that one out. Another artist from the 50s, very underappreciated. We always talk about Little Richard. We talk about Fats Domino. We talk about Elvis, of course, Buddy Holly. But we don't ever really talk about Gene Vincent too much. And the Blue Caps. Of course, they call him the Screaming End. Gene Vincent, Bebop-A-Lula, one of the greatest songs in the history of rock and roll. It inspired a lot of the punk rock and the new wave. I know I had an opportunity to interview Brian Setzer of the Stray Cats, another underappreciated band. And that was the touchstone for him. That's what inspired, he told me, inspired everything. Bebop-A-Lula is his favorite song. He felt like that was a song that just blew his mind. And, Race with the Devil. Gene Vincent was just incredible. That scream and Bebop-A-Lula, I mean, that's rock and roll. Just incredible. When I heard it as a kid, I was just mortified, really. Anyway, just fantastic. So going into the 60s, the band that we interviewed yesterday, the Zombies, she's not there. We have the story of that. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Have an interview with the entire band. Zombies were very underappreciated. Odyssey and Oracle, one of the great albums of all time. And They just created. They were just geniuses. They created incredible music, and they're definitely worth checking out. Oh, thank you very much, Jones. Let's see, Jonestown Autopsy. Thank you, appreciate that. Wayne, appreciate artist Donnie Iris. Yeah, we did. We covered Aliyah last year in the summer. We covered that. Lance Heaps, great to see you on here, Lance. Appreciate it very much. Happy late birthday. Just got a text there from him. So yeah, so basically the Zombies, they're definitely worth checking out. Odyssey and Oracle, masterpiece. And then the Kinks. Are you kidding me? This is a band that does not get anywhere near the praise that they deserve. They're on par, and I know people are going to fault me for saying this. They're on par with the Beatles. They are. I mean, obviously the Beatles released more great songs over a longer period of time. Well, a shorter period of time, but the Kinks, they inspired punk rock. I mean, Ray Davies is the godfather of Britpop and one of the finest songwriters ever. And I think people, of course, recognize. They always talk about Lola, and You Really Got Me, but I mean, the Kinks, their output was incredible, and I love their album in the '80s with "Come Dancing" and "Don't Forget to Dance." Great songs in the '80s as well. This is a band that came together again and did it just as well. So the Kinks to me are, and actually a little known fact, John Lennon's favorite songwriter of all time, he's quoted as saying, is Ray Davies. So I mean, that tells you a lot. Another band that obviously very, very popular, but never, I don't feel like, and critically acclaimed, but to me, they're on the top echelon of all time, the Beach Boys. And I'm one of these guys that I talk about this with my wife because she's a huge Beatles fan. Um, I, I'm getting in trouble for saying this, but to me, some days I think the Beach Boys may be better than the Beatles. Now I know people are going to shoot me for that. I don't like to get in this better best thing because they're both incredible for what they did. But here's my argument for the Beach Boys. The Beach Boys did it. Brian Wilson essentially did it by himself. Um, the Beatles had three incredible songwriters and another really great songwriter. I mean, all four were great songwriters. And of course, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, all in the same group. I mean, all three by themselves would be legendary songwriters and are, of course, but they were all together. And then to have George Martin at the helm, Brian Wilson did all of that. He produced, he arranged, he put everything together. He was a genius. He was a genius. He is a genius. So to me, the Beach Boys, you go back and listen to whether it's their early '60s surf stuff, California Girls, or if you listen to Pet Sounds, Smile, and anything after that, genius, absolute genius. And so I still don't think they get the credit they deserve. They weren't as hip as the Beatles. They all were wearing the same shirts and that wasn't as cool back then. And the Beatles came out and just blew up everything. But I mean, Paul McCartney himself says this favorite song of all time is God Only Knows. So, I mean, the '60s are tough because there's so many underappreciated artists because there was so much great music. But I would say also the Ronettes are very underappreciated. Ronnie Spector, the Wall of Sound, all that credit always went to Phil Spector, but really that credit should have gone to Ronnie Spector and the Ronettes. They were incredible. Be My Baby is one of the greatest songs of all time. So there you go, the '60s. Let me jump in here and see what are some of the Brian Wilson with the Wrecking Crew. Yeah, that's true. I think most of their music was not really the Beach Boys, but do remember that the Beach Boys, it's about the voice, the vocal power, the 4-part harmony. and that definitely wasn't the Wrecking Crew. So, yeah, it's true though. That comment was just made. Beach Boys. You almost have to say Brian Wilson slash the Beach Boys. And of course, even some of there was the single Caroline No was actually credited to Brian Wilson. If you go back and look in the '60s, it wasn't credited to the Beach Boys when it came out. Brian Wilson is just incredible, and I've interviewed him a couple of times, and we're going to be releasing that down the road. So please bear with us there. Okay, so Mr. I agree. Mr. is very underappreciated. That Welcome to the Real World. Just a great record. Paul Davis, such an underrated artist songwriter. Jason Lee, thank you. Yeah, Paul Davis is. I agree with that. I've interviewed a few people that work with Paul, and I have some memories from them. Actually interviewed Marie Osmond, who did a duet with Paul Davis back in the day. And in his heyday with I Go Crazy and Cool Night and some of those great songs, almost a little bit of yacht rock in there. That great cool 70s sound. So thank you for the comment. Okay, so let's get into the 70s. Somebody we just covered on Saturday, who I think is one of the most underappreciated vocalists ever, and I think is maybe one of the top 10 greatest singers ever, Mickey Thomas. Mickey is phenomenal vocalist. And as you could hear, if you saw Saturday's piece, which is a story of Fooled Around and Fell in Love, he still got it. He was crystal clear. He actually picked up the guitar and was showing me when he and Elvin Bishop started, and he showed him the song, and it was kind of just off the cuff. He went and grabbed the guitar and started playing it and was singing it. He wasn't prepared to sing in this interview. He sounded incredible. And Jane when Jefferson Starship released Jane. I mean, you listen to his vocals on that. He's right there with the best of them, with Brad from Boston and Mr. Steve Perry from Journey. I mean, Mickey Thomas is that great. So I think he's very underappreciated. Chicago. I think Chicago is very, very underappreciated. Obviously sold a lot of records, not underappreciated when it comes to fans. Critics never gave them their due. And of course, there's the 70s Chicago and the 80s Chicago, right? Partial to the 80s Chicago, even though I love both. But growing up with Bill Champlin and Peter Cetera together, Hard Habit to Break, incredible. Just a sensational song. And the horns and speaking of horns, another band that's just great, like Chicago, is and then you've got sorry, I had a text there. Then you've got Earth, Wind, and Fire. I think Earth, Wind, and Fire is very underappreciated. I think that those harmonies. I mean, Morris White and Philip Bailey. Philip Bailey's got one of the greatest falsettos ever. And so Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, I just saw that come up. I agree. He's very underappreciated. Tower of Power. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, Chicago is just incredible. And Sean Piper, Badfinger, underrated and very tragic band. Yeah, but Badfinger, that's something we're definitely going to cover down the road. That's a great story. So back in the 70s, Earth, Wind, and Fire. Robert Palmer, I think, is very, very underappreciated. I think he was such a stylist, such a great vocalist. And of course, you have his 70s work and his 80s work. And I mean, of course, I knew him. I recognized him in the 80s with Addicted to Love and Didn't Mean to Turn You On and Simply Irresistible, all those great pop songs. But then you go back to his 70s stuff, and it's just incredible. Adam not only knows what's up with the movies, also a huge movie buff. Thank you, Lance. Appreciate that. A good friend of mine there. Anyway, moving on to Robert Palmer, Bob Seger, who I covered last week. Everybody talks about the great American songwriters, Springsteen's, and of course, Jackson Browne and Bob Dylan. Bob Seger is right there, no doubt about it. Let's see, T20's Grunt to Allison Chains for the 90s. Actually, we're going to get to the 90s, and I agree with you there. So jumping back in 70s, looking at my list here, Bob Seger, definitely one of the greatest American songwriters ever. Music and fiction, the great topic, professor, underappreciated 60s artist, P.F. Sloan, a great writer. Absolutely agree. And Dan Vargas says, wants to give you more. Okay. Well, thank you, Dan. Is it Danny? Danny, appreciate it. Okay, so back into the 70s, Gladys Knight. Gladys Knight is incredible. Such a spectacular singer. One of the greats. She does not get the credit that she deserves. Best thing that ever happened to me. One of the greatest songs ever. Her vocal on that. I mean, just watching her singing "That's What Friends Are For" with Elton John and with Dionne Warwick and Stevie Wonder. She steals the show with all those geniuses there. And so I think she's very underappreciated. And I think Billy Joel is underappreciated, definitely by the critics. One of the greatest songwriters ever. And of course, I'm partial. He's one of my favorites ever, but an incredible singer. And Evan Staub doing number one in our hearts. Dave Loggins, Please Come to Boston. Yeah, that's a great song. Okay, so into the 80s, my favorite decade. Consider the 60s to be the greatest decade ever, but the 80s are my favorite. Tears for Fears. Tears for Fears, most underappreciated band, probably top 5 in my opinion ever. They do not get the credit they deserve. Roland and Kurt, incredible. Just dazzling songwriters, marvelous in every way, shape, and form. 3 great records in a row. You can't say enough about that. I mean, Songs from the Big Chair alone solidify them. They're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is a total injustice. Some of the greatest songwriters, and they would have been right there. If they would have come out in the 60s, they would have been right there with the Beatles and the Beach Boys and everybody. Of course, those were their influences, but they took those influences, put a little new wave with it. And I just can't say enough about Tears for Fears. We're going to cover them much more down the road. Survivor, Jimmy Jamison, one of the greatest singers ever. And I think Survivor, they were right there when Vital Signs came out. They were right there with Journey and with Foreigner, right there on the same line. And then some things happened, unfortunately. Egos and other things happened, and the band broke up. But they were right there at that point. But Jimmy Jamison, to come in and do what he did, and rest in peace. He was just an incredible vocalist. Queensryche. Are you kidding me? Operation Mindcrime, greatest heavy metal concept album ever. And we're definitely going to cover Queensryche down the road. In fact, I've got a possible interview coming up with Jeff Tate, so stay tuned on that. The Replacements, they're definitely in my top 10 favorite bands of all time, and we're going to cover them. Paul Westerberg is just one of the greatest songwriters ever. And the thing about the Replacements that was really tough is that Paul Westerberg struggled with, that line of selling out or not selling out. Ian Crawley, thank you very much. Definitely Dream Academy and Fiction Factory. Yeah, those are some great ones. But back to the Replacements. Very sad story about the Replacements, because I think that Paul Westerberg could have been considered one of the greatest songwriters ever. He just did. Of course, they were very inspired by Big Star, by the Stones. They came from that. Howard Jones for the 80s. That's Dabadison. Anyway, so the Replacements, will definitely cover them more down the road, but Pleased to Meet Me. I mean, they had every album that they released to me was right there with greatness for sure. Just ferocious, incredible rock and roll. And Pet Shop Boys to me they were just hit after hit after hit makers. Their melodies were incredible. They took synth pop by storm, and it didn't matter if it was the 80s or the 90s or now. Their stuff just holds up. I would say the House Martins. I pulled that one out. If you haven't checked it, if you don't know who the House Martins are, go check them out. London Hole 4 and The People Who Grin Themselves to Death. Masterpiece of the 80s. And we'll definitely cover the House Martins. I think Simple Minds. Everybody gives credit to U2, which is deserved, but to me, Simple Minds, they were a little similar, in that vein. They did not get the credit they deserve. Don't You Forget About Me is a phenomenal song. Don't get me wrong, but there's so much more. Alive and Kicking is one of the great songs of 1985. And you've got to go check out More Simple Minds. We've already covered him down the road. And again, like I said, I think Phil Collins is very underappreciated, definitely by the critics. I mean, he's inspired so much of what's going on now in hip hop, highly regarded. Into the 90s, and we'll get out of here so you can get on with your Tuesday, 420. Alice in Chains were number one for me in the 90s because to me, everybody talks about Nirvana. They talk about Pearl Jam. Well, let me tell you something. Lane Staley is, I'm going to make a bold statement here. He's the best vocalist of the grunge era, bar none for me. Lane Staley. With apologies to Chris Cornell because I think he's close. But to me, Lane Staley, his voice just ruptured my soul. I mean, he was just such an incredible singer. Rooster, to me, is the masterpiece of that early 90s grunge. I'm telling you, Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell, one of the great songwriters of that time, they're just so underappreciated. And I miss Lane Staley. I remember when the day he passed away, it was just, I felt as sad as I did the day that Kurt Cobain passed. I just think that Lane Staley was, he was just a genius singer and very underappreciated. We'll definitely cover him in an episode of Vox because I think that he was just a brilliant voice, just essential listening for the 90s. The Sundays. If you haven't heard the Sundays, you've got to go check that out. Harriet Wheeler is one of the great female voices of all time. And they didn't really break here in the United States, obviously on alternative radio, but and they only released 3 albums and they disappeared. And I'm trying to track Harriet Wheeler down. I'd love to do an interview with her. And I want to cover the Sundays because I just think they were like the female Smiths, like they sounded very, very much like the Smiths to me. There was their guitarist was great. He had a Johnny Marr quality to him. But her voice is just spellbinding, And so love that. Another artist in the 90s that was incredible, George Michael. George Michael, everybody talks about Wham when we talk about Faith, but George Michael in the 90s was underappreciated. George Michael older was definitely, let's see, John Catalano says Tesla. I agree. Tesla is very underappreciated. I saw Tesla was my first concert, actually. First concert I went to was Poison, and Tesla opened for him on the Open Up and Say Ah tour. And Love Song was incredible to hear live. Okay, so George Michael in the 90s, older. We'll definitely cover that down the road. Listen Without Prejudice, which is a story in and of itself, which is very great. Volume 1 and 2, only one volume was released. There's a great history to that, and we'll definitely cover that. But older was definitely George Michael's most personal album. And then Harry Connick Jr. I'm kind of going a little bit outside of the genre here of rock and roll, but I feel like Harry Connick Jr. had some great albums. He released some big band swing that was great. And I think he's underappreciated. Mother Love Bone, simply for the fact that Andrew Wood, what might have been if Andrew Wood had lived. And that's another story that we'll cover down the road. Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's just freakishly great. And so anyway, those are my underappreciated artists. And before we end, I want to get to a couple of your comments here. Milli Vanilli, sure. Yeah. Let's see. What do we got here? Screaming Trees. Yeah. They were definitely Jane's Addiction. I agree with Kelly Christensen says Jane's Addiction. And I'm definitely there with you. The Connick. Yep. The Connick. Social Distortion. I agree with that. And Jellyfish. You know what? They were on my list. They didn't make my final for that day, but I agree. Jellyfish. Rush. Well, yeah. Rush is very underappreciated by the critics for sure. There's no question. And Todd Rundgren. Yep. He should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Tool. Do you think Tool's underappreciated? They're incredible, yeah. But I think that they get the critically they get. I know that's a good one. I'll have to think about that one. PJ Harvey, yeah, okay. Jayhawks, 10,000 Maniacs. We've actually done an interview with 10,000 Maniacs. We'll be releasing some of that down the road. Anyway, that is Gino Vanelli, Boz Scaggs, Robbie Dupree. Yep, we got lots of great ones from you guys in the community. I appreciate you so much. Go check out our new show on Patreon. I've got my new glasses on with Zenny just the other day. They sent me 6 pairs of glasses. I gotta talk about our sponsor just for a minute because they're really incredible. When you get your Zennies, they come in this really cool case, and you even get the sunglasses to go with them. You've got your cloth and everything like that. And I've got the blue blocks on these things. So these are really great. And let's see, we've got Dabba Sun, Jermaine Stewart. You know what? I actually have the story of a few of Jermaine Stewart's songs. Yeah, I agreed. Sad ending. Yeah, Jermaine Stewart, he had an incredible voice. Anyway, that's all the time we have today, but we'll do a live stream or we'll do a volume 2. I want to get some more of your comments. Let us know below who are the most underappreciated artists throughout the decades, why, maybe what are some of the most underappreciated albums as well, and songs that don't get their due. And we'll continue this discussion because it's always fun. And we'll do another live stream very soon. Thank you so much again for all of your support. I'm feeling so much better. And look for our content over the next few days. We've got some really great stuff coming out. I'm very excited. When I got out of the hospital, I felt very strengthened and I wanted to take on the world because I was just grateful to be out of the hospital and get back on track with music. It's very healing, of course. And so we've got some really great stuff planned. I'm excited to share that with you. So look for that. And until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Stay safe out there and make sure to play the music and play it loud. All right. See you later.